Hello, everyone, and welcome to the series of Fireside Chats by Women Tech Network. We are inviting phenomenal and outstanding women to inspire and empower you to grow professionally. And today we have a special guest. Her name is Stephanie LeBlanc-Godfrey. She's the global head of inclusion programs for women of color at Google and the founder of Parenting Backwards. Stephanie is a thought leader, keynote speaker, diversity, equity, and inclusion expert, a tribe builder, a wife, and a mom of three incredible humans. She has a deep passion for investing in the growth and success of women by intentionally building community in the areas that they don't naturally occur. Stephanie was also a keynote speaker at Women Tech Global Conference 2020, where she shared some golden nuggets and useful and practical tips on parenting. And today we are going to talk about bringing your kids on your learning journey, parenting backwards, inclusion in tech, and so much more. Hi, Stephanie, and welcome.
Hi, Anna. Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed the conference. I've enjoyed the connection since the conference. And so glad to be back here talking with you and for the Women Tech audience.
Great. Thank you very much. Thanks for your feedback. And it was great to have you at the conference. Thanks for making time today for us. And for everyone who is tuning in, feel free to ask your questions in the chat or in the comments, depending where you are watching us. And wherever you hear something that resonates with you, please do let us know. So let's dive in. Stephanie, your career is impressive. Working at Google is a dream job of many. So naturally, I'd like our participants to learn more about your journey in tech. How did you become passionate about tech? And how did you navigate the tech space to get where you are today at Google?
Sure. So my story actually starts with the Gateway 2000. So for those of a certain age, you know what I'm talking about. For those who aren't, it's a computer company from back in the 90s, does not exist anymore. And it was really known for this like quirky marketing where cow spotted markings all over its products and stores and the whole thing. But the Gateway was my first computer at 10 years old, and that solidified my love for computers. And I staked my claim that I wanted to be a computer engineer at that age. And so my mom supported it 100% and put me in every after school and summer program possible that had anything to do with STEM before that acronym even was a thing called STEM. And so my love for computers lasted straight through high school and informed my decision to attend an engineering school. And I received my bachelor's of engineering degree in electrical engineering.
Interesting. So like from early age, you became passionate about technologies and went to tech school, tech university, and started as engineer, right?
Yes.
So what happened then when you started as an engineer, your first job? How did you feel that? And how was your journey, where you are now at Google doing the impactful work?
So at my college, I was part of a co-op program where every other semester you would intern at a company doing some form of technology or engineering focus. And so I spent the majority of my intern years at a financial company. So at the start of my senior year of college, I got a full-time offer. And so that was amazing. I didn't have to worry about what I was going to do, where I was going to get a job. I had it booked. And so I was so excited because I had already been interning there for a number of semesters. But fast forward a year in, all the whining and dining that I experienced during my many summers there were a distant memory. I was surrounded by people that were just many years older than me, different life stages than me. And frankly, a very white male-dominated world, being at a finance company and then doing what they called back-end engineering, being in the back-end office. And so I was alone. I didn't know anything about mentors and sponsors at the time so that I could go and find one. And so unfortunately, for a year, I quietly planned my exit. and left the engineering world. And so my career took a turn into digital media, where I got to be the number crunching, query running, Excel formula loving geek that I am. And I then got to take that love of numbers and merge it with compelling storytelling with data. And so I would talk to companies about how they can increase their revenue and increase their competitiveness with their peers. And so about 10 years in, I realized I was good at it, but I wasn't passionate about it. And so also having kids literally changed how I viewed my career. I wanted to shift from what I was good at into what I was passionate about. And so there entered my third career, diversity and inclusion, which is what I'm focused on now.
Wonderful. That's very interesting. I think actually financial and fintech space is still male dominant. That's basically from what I see online at different events. This mostly crowded and put men in the spotlight. So I think this is all still, unfortunately, the case. The fintech industry is pretty male dominated as well. But it's very interesting the way we're navigating the tech space, and you shared that there were no mentors or sponsors, and not sure that time there was such a thing. Like right now, we talk so much about mentorship, sponsorship, allyship, right? And we know more. There are more resources, there are more books, there are more people who are knowledgeable in this field. But that time there was just not so many resources, right?
And organizations like yours,
and
right?
Organizations, right?
How many women are being able to connect globally through your platform and learn and see models for what they want to be able to form relationships and ask questions so that they can continue on their journey. Instead of feeling so isolated that they just quietly creep out in the night. So it's so important to have these spaces so that even though it's male dominated, you can stick with it because you've created a community of women that can really back you up and keep you going.
Right. It's about having the support network. Yeah. And, I'm wondering, what were some of the main challenges that you faced in tech? You said that at the beginning you didn't have mentors or sponsors and felt also a little bit excluded from the community. What were later, the challenges that you faced, and who were your important mentors and sponsors at later stage? And maybe your role models that you said, hey, well, if she's doing, I can also too, or she's succeeding in this.
Yeah. So what's interesting, I left tech, and then where do I end up? At the biggest tech company in the world, at Google. And so what I loved about my time here within tech is that I got to balance my love for talking to people and storytelling, but then also marrying that with my love for just numbers and big data. But then imagine me, a young Black woman, walking into a big publisher or a big company and saying, hey, I've got some information about, things you're not doing so well. We call them areas for opportunity, right? The word spin. And this is what I think you should do. Here's what your competitors are doing. And the room naturally, right, has been just white male dominated. So I'm the only woman, only person of color in the room. And it's constantly, it'd be like, well, who? That constant having to prove myself. Because think of it as a consultant where I'm just kind of in and out of different engagements with publishers. And so each time I kind of had to immediately establish myself as an authority in the room, right? That I'm not there to just take notes or just watch, but actually I'm the main part of the show. And so that's been a challenge, but one that I actually really enjoyed, right? They may dismiss me as we're coming in the room because they're not sure who I am. But when I'm leading the presentation and telling them things that are going to make them millions, multi-millions of dollars, they start to perk up and give it. And so I love just the human social experiment that it was to walk into spaces, be judged, and then once they see the information that I have, now they're interested and want to be my friend. So it's definitely a little daunting and taxing. But mentally, I was like made for that, and so really enjoyed the challenges of kind of breaking down the barriers in that space.
Wow, that's interesting. You were like trailblazing, like making these bold moves and then actually surprising them with the results. And I think that's what change makers do. Really love that. Right now I think everyone is talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but not so many companies actually leave this diversity and inclusion. Some of them just tick the boxes. So I like a little bit us to talk, how can a company create a culture of inclusion and create the atmosphere of belonging, regardless of which stage there are. We are talking about startups, we are talking about mid-stage and maybe big companies.
Yeah, so my personal story in terms of getting into D&I was before it is the sort of number one like buzzword that it is now for companies. Based on my story, starting out and being isolated and being alone, I wanted to have an impact in the tech space that ensured that other women, that other people of color did not leave something that they were passionate about because they didn't see a path forward, because they didn't see peers or leaders that look like them. And so that really drives the work that I do and the work that has been going on for so many years, right? Diversity and inclusion has not just popped up in 2020, although after all that 2020 has brought us, companies are really going and have to continue going beyond the performative statements and the financial donations, right? People are more tuned in to the values and the meaningful ways it takes to care for its employees in times of crisis, whether it's the pandemic or racial injustice. And so from my personal perspective, companies need to work on intentionally addressing the policies, the programs, and the processes within their organization. And that means they have to be committed to overhauling things that cause harm to the very communities that they are trying to serve. It's nothing personal. The data shows where hiring trends are, retention trends, and attrition trends by race and gender, right? That's things that most well-established companies have. And so we need to follow the data in the same way that we would follow the data when we're making a decision as to whether we should continue on with a product line or a service within the company. It has to be treated that very same way. The second piece is that it's not a check the box. It's not let's just stand up a mentorship program and then all will be right with the world, right? It's culture takes years to kind of move everyone along. And so we have to be comfortable with the fact that people are still going to leave. People will still be disgruntled. People will still not align with the changes that a company is trying to make. And that's okay. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take those needle point movements pushing forward.
Yeah. You cannot just build that culture of inclusivity overnight, right? And it's just to wake up and say, hey, from now on, we become an inclusive company. And that's how we're going to do it.
And you asked about startups. And I think that diversity and inclusion, the benefit for startups is that you're creating it from the ground up. And so you're not going to wait until you become a 500 or 1,000 person company before you're like, oh, how should I include diversity? How should I be diverse, right? You have the opportunity out the gate to be really intentional about where you look to hire talent, the culture that you create to make sure that it's inclusive of race, gender, ability, veteran status, all of these things, so that you become a magnet to those that are aligned with your mission, want to do the work, but can also feel comfortable being in the space that you've created within your company.
Right, good points, definitely. And yeah, coming back to our starting point about you got a job in Google, maybe you can share a little bit more, how did that happen, and have you, like, because you shared about the publishers, right, that you came out there and say, hey, that's what you need to improve, and that's how you can improve and do better. So how did the Google thing happen to you?
Yeah, so I was at NBC at the time. I worked on this big project, the divestiture of their media products from Microsoft. So MSNBC today, they're all owned by Microsoft. And so I was going back and forth to Seattle to work with that team to bring it in-house under the NBC Universal umbrella. So I'm like doing this thing. I've got a career. I'm climbing the ladder. And a friend of mine reached out to me and said, like, hey, I know someone who's hiring at Google, working on a role with publishers. Like, why don't you just try? And I'm like, why not? I mean, it's Google. What are the odds that I'd get in anyway? And so I applied to the role and had 8 intense interviews over probably like a month and a half. But it was the most invigorating. So I'll tell a quick story about one of the interviews that I had. So this gentleman, we're in a room, just a whiteboard and some markers. And he says, a publisher wants to make $1 million next year. Can you do it? That was it. That was the question. No additional information, no anything. So now I'm like, okay. So I start asking questions, what type of publisher, like all of these prodding questions to understand the business more, so that I can then like make up numbers to try to get to the place. So like my underarms are like sweating. I'm nervous. Like I'm not understanding because I've never had an interview like this before. And at the end, he was like, I just wanted to see how you think, right? What are the things when you don't know something? How do you respond? What questions do you ask? How do you keep the conversation going to get to a point where you can figure it out and come up with something that's defensible? And so I was like, can we do another one? That was my response after that, because I was like, that was so cool and outside the box when it comes to questions about your strengths and what you could work on, that kind of thing. But just what they were focused on is, how do you think? What's the process that you use? And so when I got the job at Google, I almost didn't take it. I was like, I can't. I'm like doing this thing at NBC. It's like, that's a big deal. I'm climbing the ladder. I've got direct reports and the whole shebang that looks good on paper. But everyone around me was like, it's Google, you're going. I kind of didn't have a choice but to go. But shortly thereafter, did not regret the decision at all. And it's been such a personally and professionally rewarding experience to be in that company.
Wow. That's very exciting. And I did really love the example from real life, what you shared. Yeah. And I think it's very interesting for our listeners, because I think many engineers and women in tech, people in tech, want to work at Google. So it's good to know that you might have 8 interviews or some challenging questions, and you should be open to think big. Don't be afraid, right, of this surprising questions, like, and also $1 million, so whatever the numbers can be, and like to be open also to opportunity and to start thinking, rather than just look and say, well, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to approach this client, right? So just start thinking, and in the process, discover how is that going to happen.
Be comfortable asking questions. Be comfortable saying that you don't know, but here's what I'm thinking. So being comfortable about what your thought process is, because that's the magic of being there and doing the work, is that, like, we don't have the answers, but we're going to talk it through and figure out what feels right and kind of get pieces of information to help build the foundation for whatever it is that we're building, right? So yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and asking the right questions, right? Asking questions.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely like it. In your current role as global head of inclusion programs for women of color, what are the projects that you're working on currently, and what are the challenges that you're facing?
Yeah, so my role is unlike any that I've heard of. I don't know another person's role that is solely focused on women of color. And so we define it as Black, Latina, Indigenous, and Asian women. And although it's under the women of color like naming umbrella, it's important that the experiences with each one of those communities is different. There are a lot of commonalities, but there are different experiences just based on the historical context of the US. That means that there are unique ways that we need to connect with those communities and in turn be able to retain them within a company. And so my role came as a clear signal, a clear investment from Google that this was important to them. In 2016, Google published the Diversity Annual Report. And so it's a publicly available report that shares hiring, retention, and attrition information with race and gender overlays, right? And so that number shows that people of color attrite at a much higher rate than the company, and that hiring and retention are the areas where we need to focus on people of color, specifically women of color. Another piece of data is around our internal employee surveys. And so these are two important pieces of data that every company should be following, right? What's the internal sentiment of the community, again, with that race, gender, and other overlays, so that you can really zero in based on what that data is saying to show which communities are in the need of the most support. And so that's how my role came to play. And so first we start out bringing the communities together. So for the first time for each of those communities, we had the first and the largest gathering of each one of those communities in a 1 to 2 day summit that allowed them to see, like, okay, I'm not the only one. There's so many of us. It feels like when you feel like you're the only one. And we spent just so much time pouring into them, building community, personal enrichment, professional development, bringing in experts externally to speak to them. And what that did is signal to them that we are invested in them, in creating spaces for them to be their authentic self, to connect with other women, and to energize them. So when they go back to normal, they've built a community outside of their team dynamic, outside of their one-to-one relationship with their manager, that supports them going through their career journey. And so, 2020 took a spin. And so all of the initial events that we had planned went virtual. But as you and I were talking earlier, virtual has been an absolute blessing in terms of getting communities together quickly. It doesn't have to be region specific. There's no financial commitment to take to get from here to there. You just have to log on. And so that's been amazing for us to be able to churn out conversations, honest, open, complex conversations with each of these communities in a way that they feel supported, in a way that they feel close to folks, even though we've been socially distanced for feels like a year or two.
Yeah, did.
And really continuing in that fashion to not only create spaces for them, but to also have a pulse on the community and understand what their needs are, what their what their requests are for what they need from managers, from leaders, and being able to take it directly from them to the leaders to ignite change.
I like that. And I think they're the ones who need this help the most in times like this, with different issues to deal with, to support maybe family members or to support the children. And it takes us to another very big point of our discussion is parenting backwards. That's what you are passionate about. And I'd like us to start with, with a short maybe introduction of what does it mean for those who are not familiar with this philosophy, and what are the key pillars of parenting backwards.
Yeah, so parenting backwards is my passion project that I formalized in January of this year. But I've long been on a mission dedicated to just creating spaces for professional women specifically to invest in their parenting life with the same focus that they have for their professional life. So as professionals, we have mentors, sponsors, courses, conferences, books, all these resources. But what resources do we have as parents, right? That's really focused in on our skills, our strengths, evaluating the what and why, and how we do this parenting thing. And so that's what I'm really focused on. How can we look on where we want our kids to be and then fill in that gap of us going on the journey with them to get them to fulfill and be their best selves.
Interesting. And did your children motivated you somehow to take this approach, and how did that happen? Because I do believe you're a mom of 3 children. I'm a mom of 1, and I don't even know how is it to be a mom of 3 children. It's already admirable, and I think we need to award you already for that. So yeah, I'm wondering 2 things. What is the best way, like what is the best maybe age, or when is the earliest stage when you need to start this teaching to utilizing the parenting backwards philosophy? And is there age when it's too late?
Right. So the way that it started is my oldest is 10. And so she's older than the other kids in my mom group, right? So they were relying on me first to share like, okay, what stroller should I get? And what conversation should I have with my manager when I'm ramping back up? Like that was the spectrum of conversations that I was having with them. And then I would just share stories about how I was raising them. And they're like, Steph, you have to like scale this and tell other people, right? I have such a creative way of just looking at parenting of like, how can I teach these lessons to you in both creative and age appropriate ways, right? Like I just want to raise like these children that that follow their happiness and don't go on autopilot and check boxes of what they should be doing. And so any opportunity where they're like, Mom, I'm interested in this. I'm like, all right, cool. Let's get you into a class. Let me see within my network if I can talk to someone who already does that. Like I go in. And so the idea around parenting backwards is to start at the earliest of ages, right? Exposing your kids to diversity, having conversations and giving them the vocabulary to express their emotions, to see when things see when the right things aren't happening and be comfortable and confident to say that. And then also to learn the lessons that we as adults are learning right now. What would it look like if we had 10, 20, 30 years lead time on learning the skills that we are reading books on, listening to podcasts for, and really investing in our time in developing now? If just as kids, we heard the words, right? Or we saw our parents kind of mirror the ways that they deal with anger or frustration or sadness, that we don't hide who we are as people, but we put on display who we are and really work through that in front of them in a healthy way. In a healthy way. But that they can see, okay, that's how, you know what, when I'm sad, I'm just going to go into my room. I'm just going to take a shower. Like whatever it is, that they understand that there are ways that you can react to your emotions. There are ways that you can process them in ways that are good for you. Listening to your body is another one, your intuition. And so they don't always understand the words. They're definitely not always interested in what you have to say, but they're listening. And when we keep it on repeat and use everyday moments to bring those lessons together, it makes a difference, and it starts to become part of the DNA of who they are. And the most important piece that I want it to just relay to the audience is that it's not meant to be more pressure or another thing for you to do. That is not it at all. It's just bringing a level of self-awareness, being aware of the opportunities, the spaces that you can talk or have a conversation with your kids. And then when you are in the right frame of mind, have the energy to do so, that you can go in and have those moments with them. It's not meant to be on it every time and making the best use of every situation. We're tired.
Yeah.
And we've got our own things going on, right? But it's just being self-aware. So in those moments when you can, that you see it and can take advantage of it with your kids.
Wonderful. I'm wondering, like, to what you've been listening, to what you've been saying, I was listening and thinking that we on one hand, no matter how we react on some things or say words, children will absorb everything, right? Like we kind of need, there's lots of work to be done, of course, but it's okay to do this work also with our kids. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, what are some of the situations that we can take our children on this learning journey? And maybe what are the situations when we shouldn't take our children on this learning journey?
Yeah. So I think, as I had mentioned before, like being in tune with yourselves and your emotions from early on, right? The time that they can talk, whether that's 1 or 2, giving them vocabulary, even if it's not, I'm feeling frustrated, but I'm feeling like whatever cute baby words you want to put in for that, but something that they can connect with and understand. I think a positive relationship with money. So including them on the conversations that you have with your family about money, whether it's, planning for a vacation or putting a budget on eating out, because that's a thing in COVID, right? Where we're just tired of eating and cooking. But talking to them about the money piece. So for me, last year, 2019, I went into this whole Dave Ramsey, like binging on his podcast. And so Dave Ramsey is this popular financial guy. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to take my kids on that journey with me, pieces that I connected with there. And so it was around Christmas time. And usually, we'd buy stuff online. Kids just see boxes appearing at home and they have no clue how any of this works. And so my husband and I intentionally sat down with our kids, wrote out all of the people that we were going to get gifts for, put a budget to it, and then actually went to the bank, took out cash, and went to a physical mall. I mean, that in itself deserves an award, because going to the mall during the holiday season is not fun. But what they saw was, okay, physical cash in an envelope, and we're like, okay, we're going to get gifts for all of our loved ones. So remember, I told you I'm a number geek. So I created it in an Excel sheet, and in real time, I showed my oldest how to subtract using formulas in Excel, so that as we were shopping and we'd get the bill, that she could input it, and then she'd know how much is left over.
Wow.
for each person. So I had to include that in there. It wouldn't be me without that part. But we spent the day at the mall shopping and kind of inputting it. When it came time to their dad, they went over budget. And I was like, that's fine. We will have to remove budget from another family member. If you're okay with that, great. Or maybe you want to reevaluate what you purchased, so you don't have to do that. And so those are the conversations that we were having in real time. And then at the end of the day, when it was just a bunch of coins and $1 bills, they're like, wait, what happened? But it was such a phenomenal sort of act of getting them in the moment, part of the family, part of the decision-making process, empowering them to say, this is what I want, this is what I don't want, and understanding how money works and what things are worth, most importantly, was so impactful. To this day, they continue that. They're looking forward to doing that this year, even though that may not be a thing given where we are.
Shopping online.
Yeah, but they just became so much more aware of money and its value. And it just created this moment that we still continue to talk about and share and laugh about. And so that's what I mean about going on the journey. Whatever it is that you're working on for yourself, you can come up with that creative and age appropriate way to share that with your kids.
Christmas is coming, so for everyone who is listening to us, maybe you will come up with some creative online way. But I totally agree with you. I mean, sometimes we think that our children are too young or they won't understand, but when are you going to teach them this financial literacy, right? You need to include them early on and say, hey, that's what the value of this money is. That's what you can buy. That's how you can evaluate. That's how you probably should evaluate. And they probably were surprised how fast money goes, right? In a sense that, it's very often children want so much and we don't know how to set the boundaries right and say, hey, this is the budget. Yeah. So it's good to empower them in a sense that they would know how to behave with money and become more comfortable, but become more intentional and reasonable about buying certain things or not buying them. Yeah, that's a really good example. I really love that. Another interesting question that I'd like us to dive in is that when and how to start talking to kids about race, bias, and social justice. How did you talk to your children about these things?
So kids are super curious and they are constantly processing the world around them. And so they will ask you some tough questions that you're like, I have no clue how to answer that. But that's okay. I think the first thing is don't shy away from the questions, right? When you do that, the questions don't go unanswered, they go unasked. And so that means they'll go somewhere else to find answers, or they will just make up the answers in their head. And so you want to have a say and be a part of the way that they are developing their sense of the world. So be direct about what you know and don't know about the topic, and head to the internet to find age-appropriate resources to push the conversation forward. When I had my oldest, when she was around 3, 4, I'm like, do I talk about race? Do I not? How, when, right? When is too early? Am I invoking something that they weren't aware of? They are aware. And I shared this story in the session where during MLK Day weekend, my daughter was learning about MLK. And so she came home and she was like, I am so happy about MLK. He made it possible so that I could play with my cousin. And I was like, how so? And she was like, well, I'm white and my cousin's black. And MLK, Martin Luther King, made it so that we can play together. And I was like, you're not white. So this is if the moment was a picture, that would be it, where I'm like, oh, okay, now's the time for me to talk about who you are and who you aren't, and give them that sense of identity. And so I encourage to talk about it as early as possible, so that they are not misidentifying who they are. And so part of that is, seeking out programming that depicts children in a variety of contexts and a variety of environments, right? That's using their imaginations, that's experiencing just both emotional highs and lows that any other child would experience. What you don't want to do is have like this book of like, hey, we have this one book with a Black person on it, or we have this one book with a girl on it, and that kind of signifies it. We want to use all the books, even that are sort of one-dimensional, and talk there like, who do you think is missing from this? Mm-hmm. Who would you include in this book if you were to write it? So that they become both aware of what's missing and what they would add to it. And not just if it's a book about a certain type of person, that book is just all consuming and they're not the norm, right? We want diversity to be weaved into just everything that they're exposed to. And so they have to be aware of when it's not there and when it is. Another piece is around giving your children the language necessary to describe. So I keep saying that over and over about giving your children the language. This teaches your kids to recognize forms of oppression and name it. If it's a book about sports and there's no girls in there, is that saying that girls can't do sports? But you do sports and you love sports. And so having that conversations, following up with discussions on what could be done to change or stop whatever the oppression is, or whatever the situation is, will just give them the confidence to be vocal about stopping it in its tracks. Another one that's steeped in the parenting backwards philosophy is think about how you were introduced to race. How would you have liked to be introduced to the topic? And so from there, consider what needlepoint changes and actions you can take to have your life reflect the change you want your kids to see, right? We talk about wanting our kids to be diverse, but what does our friend group look like? Who comes over to dinner? What are the TV shows that we watch, the books that we read, the magazines that we read? If that's one-dimensional, but you're preaching to your kids the other thing, there's a disconnect there where they are modeling what they see, not just doing what you're telling them to do. And then as far as content, so there are these two amazing organizations called Embrace Race and Conscious Kids. They put out superb content for educators and parents on navigating these topics with their kids. And I mean, Conscious Kids particularly, has a whole, they partnered with Google on a whole entire syllabus for books organized by age range, and then gives like, here are some questions that you can ask, some discussion questions. Here are things, just handing you sort of a playbook on how to have these conversations. And so they are amazing. But also on TV, Netflix and Sesame Street and Nickelodeon, they've all created content for kids around the topic of race. And so we've watched them at home. And again, I don't want your expectations to be too high. Sometimes they watch it and they're like, okay, could we watch some nonsense next?
Don't expect too much. Just sit down and things go smooth and they will learn everything.
Right. It doesn't
These are kids. It was like, what is this talk about? Like, I already know everything, Mom.
Exactly. And that's okay. You guys have watched it. You have put forth your best effort to have this really amazing conversations. And they're like, okay, bye. But don't give up. They have taken in some aspect and some portion of it, and it will come out. You'll see it come out, whether it's a few days, weeks, or months later. but just keep exposing them to this, and they'll take what they want, leave the rest. But when you're doing that on a consistent basis and sparking conversations as much as they're willing to have, it's just creating spaces for those building blocks. And so that's okay.
Right, I like that. I especially like that you highlighted some resources. So Embrace Race, Conscious Kids, Nickelodeon, Netflix, of course. And I see that, for example, I'm on Netflix watching some female-focused movies where women are represented during different eras, in different circumstances, where they play game-changing, a leading role. And then Netflix shows me more of this. Well, that's how all algorithms work. So when you start to, and that's how, like, when you start to introduce certain topics, for example, talking about diversity or talking about race, or raising awareness about social justice or injustice. So you step by step can prepare children towards seeing the bigger picture, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So my question here is also connected to, it sounds like we as parents influence our children a lot. So how to understand which areas of our development need more attention so we can become better parents? So how to understand, hey, I'm not paying more attention on diversity. So how can, maybe I don't know also, like how I can kind of become more aware of where I need to improve so I can help my children?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think, we have to take this journey of becoming self-aware and questioning why we do the things we do. So in one of my courses, I go deep on dismantling what I dub the Simon Says syndrome. And so, the game, Simon says, raise your hand. Simon says, put it down, put your hand down, then you're out, right? And so the Simon Says syndrome is when you're arbitrarily imparting your parenting power to get your kids to do something that you want them to do. And so in my course, we do 3 things. One is identify all the times we invoke Simon Says. And so this may sound like, you have to be good in math, go clean your room. You must be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. You're a girl, so you should be quiet. You're a boy, so you should be tough. Kids don't have to say, just listen, do as I say, not as I do, right? Your voice doesn't matter. There are a myriad of ways in which we put in these Simon Says of things that we want our kids to do that are arbitrary. And so the second thing to do is reflect on what's behind those Simon Says moments. Do we really want to upkeep those mantras, or are we, carrying on experiences from childhood, or just things that we don't even have a connection to, but that we think is just expected of us? And so when we know the why of our own parenting behavior and those Simon Says moments, it releases us to number 3, which is to make the decision on what you want to stop, start, do more of, and do less of, right? And this allows us to release generational trauma. It allows us to identify and understand what's behind our triggers, right? We've all had, and will, if they're not talking yet, a moment where they were like, "Mommy, your stomach's big." And then you're like, "What?" And so you get kind of like mad and frustrated at them. You're like, I do know that I need to work out. So, it's not a lie. But like, what's behind those triggers that make us react in just really big ways, and negative ways towards our children, so that we can make really intentional decisions on, what are the values, what are the skill sets, what are the mantras and expectations that we uphold, or that we want to uphold, right? So we get off of this rat race, we get out of this autopilot, and then really choose the way in which we want to show up, really choose the things that we want to put our energy into. So for me, when I started, I'm like, I have 2 little girls. I want them to be on Instagram in the cutest of outfits. And so I bought the outfits, put them in some like cute dresses with stockings. And before we left the house, there was a run in the stocking on one and juice spilled on the dress of the other. And that was the moment that I was like, I am going to stop trying to recreate what I see on Instagram, because I do not have the patience for that. So the way that we are around here, as long as their clothes are climate appropriate, I am not involved in what they put on, right? That's not where I want to put my energy. It's not important to me enough. And I also, related to that, wanted to give them the power over their own bodies to be like, this is what I feel good in, even if I think it doesn't match. Even if I hear my mom's voice saying it needs ironing or it's not appropriate for the place that we're going, I'm like, is it climate appropriate? Do you feel good in that outfit? Then that's it, right? And so when we make those decisions to stop obsessing over a thing that if we spent the time thinking about it, realize that we don't really care about, that just opens up so much more space for us to really focus in on the areas that we're interested in. So for me, it's math. My 10-year-old, she's loving math. And so now she has this carrot dangling in front of her of being in an honors class for 6th grade. And so she's excited, I'm excited. And now that we're home, like the blessing is that we get to do math homework and classwork together. And so then I could just spend my energy on that versus something else. And so that's just an example of how we kind of get to the root of our parenting and creating spaces to have these conversations. That kind of conversation does not happen over wine when you're venting and talking about all the things with your girlfriends. We have to go to the places the same way we do professionally, right? We have our group that we talk about our careers with. We have to have our group that we really have those deep parenting conversations with to get to this and really make change.
Wow, this is really inspiring and empowering. And I really love the example with outfits. And Instagram is not real, so don't try everyone to kind of copy that, repeat that in real life, because I'm sure they changed probably 5, 6, or 10 times in order to make that picture, right? But no one writes about it. I was like, I have cute babies.
That was the first outfit, the first picture, and I just knew I wasn't made for that. I wasn't made.
Yeah. Well, the how to say the moral of the story is clear. Prioritize and see the areas that really require your attention and the areas that can require your attention less, right? And I think that give children a choice to decide, to make mistakes, to say, hey, okay, last time I chose the wrong outfit, this time I can do it better, right? So they become more independent, and we are helpers when it's needed, not like, you should do this, you should do that, I shouldn't do this. So everyone who's listening to us, if you have some questions, please write us in the chat. And we are moving to another question that I'm curious about. So you're a mom of 3, which is, wow, I already mentioned that. So how do you combine an impactful work that you're doing at Google and being a mom, and how do you maintain work-life balance, especially now during COVID and work from home times?
So the other benefit of COVID is that my girls are home to kind of see what it is that I do, right? That I think when they were younger, they were like, Mom helps Black women stay at Google. That was their rendition of it. And I was really proud that that's what they had gleaned. And even more so now as they're listening in on conversations, barging in to ask 50 million questions. I'll bring them on screen or have them in the office here with me so that they can just listen in on the conversation. So again, they are absorbing the energy that I have, the love that I have for my work, the way in which I run meetings, the vocabulary and the conversations. And so I just love that they're getting this side of what it looks like to do what you love and just be in a work environment. But my role is definitely very taxing and busy. And before 2020, I was doing a ton of traveling. And so I'm listening right now to Shonda Rhimes, who's the writer for Grey's Anatomy, Private Practice, all of these like amazing shows. And she wrote a book called The Year of Yes. And in it, she talks about her parenting, where she says that if you're killing it in one area of your life, then you are most certainly failing in another. And I felt that in my soul. When I'm killing it at work, that means I'm spending more hours, more time. And that means the kids are banging on the door to be like, when are we going to eat dinner? When are you going to pay attention to me? All of those things. And then when I'm with my kids, that means the emails and the pings are piling up. But what I have done is, I feel, is just built up enough goodwill in both my professional and personal areas of my life, so that when I'm like failing in one, there's what I call this space of grace that is bestowed on me.
Space of grace.
Yeah, this space of grace is a place where the guilt, the fear of missing out, the fear of logging off, the negative self-talk doesn't last for long, because the people that I work with get it and they know that I'm all in. And so when I'm not in, they know what I'm doing, right? And so they give me the grace. And then with my kids, like, we've just done 50 million things. And then they were like, well, what's 50 million and one?
Never tired, right?
Yeah, so that space of grace is definitely a little bit more difficult, but I will replay the 50 million things that we just did. So you got to give mama some time to just focus in on something else. But having that and volleying back and forth between those two just doesn't allow the guilt to last for long. I didn't say it goes away. I didn't say that I feel like everything is balanced at the same time. It isn't, but I feel it. I let it kind of run its course, and then I move on, because I've got things to do that with them. I have things to do for work. And so I can't sit there and wallow in it for too long. So create that space of grace.
Space of grace. This is wonderful. I really taken some notes of the resources that you mentioned. Then the Simon Says syndrome. That's very interesting. I really love that you give some names and they're like so catchy and it's easy to remember. That's
right,
like,
because we're not going to remember, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like you, like somewhere. Sometimes we just remember the main things, and all these things that you're saying are super catchy. And people are writing in the chat, the space of grace. I love it. There are also questions about how it's difficult to have kids and to give them good direction and manage your career as well. I mean, like some parts of your life where you have felt your kids are going in the wrong direction. There's a question from Pari in the chat.
Yeah. I'm trying to think, like with my 10-year-old, right? Like she's in this tween age, and kids at school start to get real, start to get mean, the mean girl thing that we see. And so it's, again, having conversations with them about what you're seeing, and then sharing instances in my own life, right? So she'll recount a story where she wanted to play with one friend, and so then the other friend got mad, and then the whole group is broken up, right? And so I talk about, like, how is that fair that she gets to dominate how you choose to live your life? Look at mom and her friends, right? I've got friends from work, friends from our neighborhood, friends from here, and they come together sometimes and kind of talk through it. So I kind of just have those conversations with them so they can see, like, you're not alone, right? Things happen even as adults, but you have to just process it in a certain way. And so sharing your own experiences, moving from that hierarchical, I'm the parent and you just have to listen to what I say, to be like, we're on the same level. Let me share with you kind of things that I've experienced growing up. and then decisions that I've made as an adult and how I'm processing it. And so that gives them the confidence that they can share things with you, that you're not going to lecture them and sort of like harp on it, but that you just gave them a tad bit, you walk away, you're still looking at them, right? You're still connected and like, you're going to follow up with that conversation, but like, don't do too much in one, just kind of offer it up as like, hey, here's a conversation, and then check in on it periodically. And so that's how I'm dealing with that particular sort of situation. And then in terms of like, how do I balance this with like work and life? I got a village. I've got folks, I've got family and friends who help make all of this possible. So that when I travel, that the play dates still continue, and you know they still have connections with their friends. That you know I don't have these high expectations. If we order out 3 times a week, like to myself, I'm like, damn. But to them, I'm like, hey, who wants Mexican tonight? Who wants pizza? Who wants Italian? Because I just can't put that level of stress. Again, choosing what's really important versus not, like cooking meals every single day, not my jam. And so if we eat out a little bit more, then I just kind of shrug my shoulders and then try to do better the following week.
And that's okay also to have some diversity, you know. And on this positive, wonderful note, I'd like to finish this chat. Thank you very much, Stephanie. That's been really empowering, some eye-opening. Really love the sketchy things that you shared, Space of Grace. And thank you very much for doing what you're doing. I feel like the role that you are in Google, this like very unique position where you have this influence to help women and to empower them and to help them stay in tech and do what they love.
Yeah.
You know, this is so important. This is wonderful. Thank you very much for your insights on parenting backwards, and for everyone who listened to us. Thank you very much for joining us. If you have more questions for Stephanie, what is the best way to get in touch with you? LinkedIn?
Absolutely. So reach out to me on LinkedIn or on my website, iamslg.com. And reach out to me. I would love to continue the conversations and talk more about my courses if that's what you're interested in. And so thank you again, Anna, for really creating the space for this. I know that we all need these opportunities to talk, you know, about parenting in a different way.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stephanie. And if you have some more time, please stay with us. The live networking is on. If you join us on Hopin, everyone who is on Hopin, you can benefit from the networking. Stephanie, stay for a couple of minutes if you'd like to try networking. And if you have time, I know you're super busy. And yeah, thank you everyone for joining us today. Bye-bye, Stephanie, and see you again at our events. We'd love to have you again.
I'll be here. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.